All right, so here's a little bit of news. In case anybody wanted to go to DEF CON, DEF CON is canceled. In case anybody had any doubt about that, obviously they have to because of the virus. Nobody can be going to Vegas for a big conference, so that is not going to happen. There might be some part of it's going to be online, but there won't be an in-person event in Vegas. Splunk has an attack range, which sounds awesome. I don't think it's available for free, but you can set one up. But anyway, it's got me thinking about this stuff, and more about this later when we talk about the attack framework. But he's got attack servers and Splunk defenders and targets, and you can practice these things. So they have a Splunk attack range, which is here, and they give you information how to set it up. I don't think there is a public one for free, though, which would be nice. Anyway, it's a very important thing, and I'd like to work more projects based on pieces of that I can easily set up. Go is apparently the most popular new language by programmers. It's not the #1 language with the most jobs or the most commonly used language. Those are like Python and JavaScript, but it's pretty high on the list. I wrote a CTF to teach people the basics of Go a while ago, and it certainly is very popular. And there's a free SANS event coming up. I highly encourage all of you to sign up for this thing. It doesn't happen until June, I think. Yeah, June 4 to 5. But these SANS courses typically cost thousands of bucks, and for some reason they're giving one away for free. So I'd highly recommend signing up and tuning in. It's a 2-day online event. All right. And there's a very nice article here about a guy that decided to use Splunk to practice finding beacons for bots, remote-controlled machines that are parts of botnets. And he used the open Splunk Boss of the SOC data, version 3, and he demonstrates how to find it and process all the data and find out of those probably millions of events the bots beaconing home just by looking at repetitive traffic. So he can detect bots even if their traffic is encrypted. So that's very nice, and I might have turned that into a project. This is very interesting. The World Health Organization has backed challenge studies. Challenge studies are somewhat ethically troubling because they plan to take healthy people, inject them with a coronavirus vaccine, and then deliberately inject them with coronavirus so they get sick. This is the kind of thing that is ethically questionable because there is no treatment that we can rely on for coronavirus, and so those people might die. But, of course, at this time, many more people are dying elsewhere, so it is balancing everything. They have decided to ethically recommend this, but certainly it is rare that you see medical experiments approved that absolutely take a chance of killing people. It would seem to violate the Hippocratic Oath, but anyway, they have approved it for what that's worth. I'm not aware of anybody promising to do that yet, but they probably will. And so Ohio has a website to snitch on workers who fail to show up because they're afraid of coronavirus. This is, of course, the reason why America is opening. So bosses can force their workers to go in, and they are demanding, the Republicans are demanding to free them from lawsuits so they can force their workers to come in without providing any protection and get them killed and then not get punished for that. And there are some people that don't agree with that. And so these guys, when Ohio put up a website to snitch on workers who are doing something called fraud, refusing to work under unsafe conditions, for companies to snitch, a bunch of people disapprove, so they've written a website that will flood it with spam. So it's defeating the CAPTCHA and flooding it with extraneous reports because they have a political objection to this. So this is quite common with all online systems, and it's one reason why people don't like automated apps to report on coronavirus exposure, because if you make any kind of online system that does anything automatically, you have to consider that the people that don't like it will flood it with junk. And so you have to have some kind of plan to detect and remove the fraudulent parts of the data that come in. Here, let me see. All right, looks like he's going to stop backing up pretty soon out there. So here we are. This is the last 127 class. And I don't have a lot of new stuff, which which is probably fine. I have only 2 students, so I'm doing this mostly, I guess, to put up the video so people can see it. What I planned to do today was to talk about ARM and .NET. And I decided to just do a little bit of ARM because that took longer than I thought. So I'm just going to demonstrate the first ARM, 2 ARM projects here and talk about them. And I revised one of them today. So if you have been doing them, the second one has changed a little bit. So there's one thing I found out a couple days ago is that my ARM in the cloud is still up. This is just a Raspberry Pi sitting in a classroom at City College where I've been locked away from it for months, and I thought it probably would have been turned off or crashed by now, but it's still up. So you don't need to have a Raspberry Pi to do this, which is nice. So 413, I think I'll just demonstrate 413, but they should both work. You can connect to my Pi in the sky, and the password is not Raspberry. So I think if you go through this project, if you don't modify the port numbers of the listening shell, only one student can do it at a time, although you certainly could modify the port number of the exploits. But anyway, so now I'm in, and let's just talk about ARM exploits. So I've got a vulnerable program just like the others. The only difference in this vulnerable program and the previous ones that we've done in on x86 and x64 is that this one takes the data in hex, and then it turns the hex into, copies the hex in, not using string copy, but using mem copy. This is so we can have null bytes in the middle, because I didn't want to deal with getting rid of the null bytes, which was more of a hassle than I expected for ARM shellcode. So other than that, it's a very simple program with a simple buffer overflow, but you feed in the data in hex, like some of the other projects you've seen. So this thing here, if I look at that, it's pwd3.c. So there's the code, and I've already compiled it. So /pwd3, I can put in a password of 414141, and that's just 3 A's. And if I put in something longer, it should crash. So let's try, I think it only has room for 10. So if I put in 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 30, then I get a segmentation fault. So that does appear to be working on ARM just like it did on Intel, where you're getting a simple segmentation fault. All right, and now we can examine it in the debugger, and you can just keep using the same debugger. The GNU debugger supports ARM just as much as x86, so that's very nice. We don't need to learn a new debugger. So I can list 35 to 45. And this has been compiled with the -G switch, so it's got source code in there, and we can use source code debugging. And so, looks like my code's a little different, but all I really care about is, here's line 42 is where the buffer overflow is. So I'm going to put a break at line 43. And now I can run the program and put in 41, 41, 41, 41, which is 4 capital A's. And I guess I'll keep making this bigger for the video. All right, and so now I hit the breakpoint. Now I can do info registers. And you can see the ARM registers. There is R0 to R11, and there's really R16 of them, but some of them have alphabetic names. Here's the program counter, which is what passes for EIP, instruction pointer. And here's the stack pointer. And the base pointer for the stack is more or less R11, although this seems to point directly to the return pointer, so it seems to be off a little bit from what I would expect on Intel. But this is the top of the stack, and this is the program counter. Notice that the program counter is quite low, 107E0. You can do info proc mappings here, just like you would on other systems, and you can see that the there's other things down here, like the stack. The stack is up here up at 7E and 7F. And there's other things. Here are the 2 program segments. And I can tell the first one is where the code lives, way down here at 10,000 in hex. It's not really 10,000, but it looks like 10,000. So all the code will start with this 10, which is why I decided to use this hexadecimal input so we could have addresses with zeros in them, because it's, anyway, it'll be hard to refer to things. So the code is down here at 10,000. It's not at 400,000 where Windows code would be. And the stack is down here at 7E. So we can now examine we've already injected code and hit a breakpoint, so we can examine the stack with 50x starting at a stack pointer. And by the way, let's notice that the stack pointer is here at 250 and R11 is at 264. So the page is pretty small, which makes sense because the only variable here is just a 10-letter string, so it doesn't need much room. So let's see what happens if we examine the stack. 264 is here. So if this were an x86 program, that would be the stack frame. But in this case, R11 points directly to this, and you can tell this is the return value because remember, all the executable code is around 10,000. And you can tell that by disassembling main. And you'll see the executing code is at 10,000. So this is the return pointer, and R11 points right to that, which is a little different than Intel, where it would point 1 or 2 words away from that. So here are the 4 A's I've inputted, and here's the return pointer. So that suggests that if I put in 4 characters, if I add another 16 to get up to 20, I'll overwrite the return pointer. So let's try that. If I start the run again, say yes, and now I put in A in hex, B, C, D, E. If I've typed it correctly, that is 20 characters. And now if I look at the stack, you can see the last 4 characters, E, hit the stack pointer. So now I control the stack pointer. So I can inject code and put it anywhere I want. And I mean, I can control the program counter. Now, it is rather surprising, but in Raspberry Pi, Raspbian, the stack is writable and executable, which is a violation of all modern security models. But for some unknown reason, the Raspberry Pi operating system operates that way. So I can inject code and run it right here without having to take away any defense like we have had to in Windows. So I can put it anywhere. However, there isn't much room back here, so I'll just put it down here somewhere. All I have to do is pick an address down there, overflow the stack, overflow it some more, and just put the code down there. So that's the game. Here was my plan. You have the A's here, the stack pointer there, and I'll just put it down here at 7EFFF2B0. And that'll give you a nice address there. I can just put my code there. So if I can find some assembly code, I can put it there. Now, in the project, I go quite a bit into how you write your own assembly code in ARM, because I didn't think I could do it with Metasploit. Now, I tried again this morning, and I am able to generate some Metasploit payloads, but they don't seem to run very well. So I may update this project in the future, but at the moment, I'm still not able to make the Metasploit code work. However, you can make your own Linux shellcode here. You know, your assembly shellcode. So you write some commands and compile them and run them, and then you can inject this code, but it's all full of zeros. There are 2 kinds of 32-bit ARM assembler. There's this kind where you have 32 bits per instruction. The instructions do not differ in size the way they do in Intel. They're all 32 bits, or you can go into thumb mode where all the instructions are 16 bits. Those are the only 2 setups. Anyway, so you can make that code in an assembler, you can compile it and make shellcode that will print hello, and it's all full of zeros. But in this case, we've used a program where we can inject zeros to make it easier. And so you can make a Python code that just puts in A, B, C, D here, and then puts in the pointer to it, and then some NOPs. I came up with a NOP instruction, Googled for it, and this E01 is just an instruction that copies a register back to itself. So it's effectively a NOP. So I can make effectively a NOP sled. And you see this 0100A0 is someplace, here's, yeah, 0100A0. This is where the real shellcode starts, and I put in effectively a NOP sled here, just to make it easy. So you can run that, and it will start listening on port 4444. So this is a second Raspberry Pi, which is also still running. They're both just sitting in a classroom at the college, so you can exploit them now until they crash. And so you can, this is the same kind of thing you did in the first buffer overflow project, where you put hexadecimal data in here and then hit debug, and then it will run on my Raspberry Pi in the cloud and show you the output of a debugger. So you can exploit it. And as you see, there are 2 flags to hit, just like there were in the earlier project. One of them, all you have to do is set a certain character to 7, the character's number 7. And the other one, you have to execute this win function. So it's very similar to what you've done before, just on a Raspberry Pi. And you get used to reading this stuff. Notice how all the instructions, push, add, this is what a branch looks like. It all looks a little bit weird. And all the instructions are 4 bytes wide, so it just counts up 4, 8, 12, 16. But other than that, it's the same kind of story. So you can exploit this and find a couple of flags. And there is another one at the end. Now here you learn how to make shellcode that actually listens, bind shellcode. And you can run your bind shellcode and get a listening port and connect to it. And so here at the end, you get another flag. One thing that I've always confused students here, and it confused me this morning, so I tried to improve it again. To do this, you need to have 2 shells open. You have to have one to run a debugger, to run the exploit. You inject all this junk and it starts listening. But what happens is it's listening, but it doesn't actually launch the process until you make a connection. So you have to leave this running and open the second terminal connecting to the server, and then do the netcat to connect on port 4444, and then it will launch and give you the flag. So that's simple 32-bit ARM. I did figure out some 64-bit ARM and write it, but it requires an iPhone, which you can jailbreak. And I know a few students have borrowed it from me and might be able to do that. But I just found today that there is a 64-bit ARM cloud service where I can rent a cloud server and put it up, and you people can rent it for just a few bucks. So I haven't got it ready yet, but in the future, I'm planning to have cloud-based 64-bit ARM. Of course, you can just spend a small amount of money and own your own ARM hardware too, but I like to make all my projects so everybody can do them from anywhere, and putting things in the cloud is good. So anyway, that's all I wanted to say about ARM. And I just have a couple other things to tell you about, which are very simple. If you go to my homepage, right at the top, you'll see 2 other ways to get extra credit. There's the ATT&CK framework, which is real important for blue teamers. I highly recommend learning it. And there's command injection on SALT, which is pretty hot. This one is probably the most directly relevant to this class. SALT exploits are all the rage. This is a very simple exploit, just like the one we did on Drupal. You can set up a server and install SALT with just a few commands. You do git clone to get the GitHub source code for SALT. Then you can see all the versions that are available. The latest versions have all been patched, so you have to go back a version or 2. I went back to 3000.1. That one's vulnerable. SALT is a product that runs on a server that puts it under remote control, like SSH or like RDP. And the thing about it is you can control a whole fleet of cloud machines from one master server. So it's quite important and used by a lot of people, but it had a command injection vulnerability, which is currently being used to exploit people like crazy. Anybody that hasn't updated within about the last week is vulnerable. So you set up a server listening on these ports 4505 and 4506, so it's a SALT master, and then you install this proof of concept exploit, which is also from GitHub. And after you correct one defect in the code, this has to be true instead of false, you can then exploit the server. And when you do successfully exploit the server, it will get its root key, which indicates that it is vulnerable. And you can then execute arbitrary commands on the server. So you can do it on your server and get a flag to appear. And then you can exploit my server and find a flag that I've hidden on that server. I haven't really hidden, I told you right where it is. You just have to figure out how to read that file on my server. So it's that's good stuff to do. And I think the last thing I'll just mention is the ATT&CK framework, which is something that I always found difficult to understand, and now I'm getting into it. This is how people understand advanced persistent threat attacks. It is based on this product here from MITRE, which was once associated with MIT and is now an independent group. And they have decided to organize all the steps attackers use. So they have initial access, then they do execute, persistence, privilege escalation, and many other techniques, eventually ending in some kind of impact where they steal data or corrupt the server or something. And they have listed techniques, many techniques used by all these advanced persistent threats. And each one of these is a link. So there's a compiled HTML file. And if you click that, it will tell you what it is. And then it will tell you which APT groups used it and what it's for and what the mitigations are. So this is really like a small little textbook worth of information you ought to know. And all I did was make a few flashcard systems, essentially, like the binary games, where you can just make sure you've learned all the things on that page. So right now I've got 4 of them here. I'm planning to make at least 1 more, and I may continue after that, just as aids to help people learn all the things on that page. You should know all these attacks. They are common attacks in current use by nation states today, so it is appropriate for everybody in the world of security, either attackers or defenders, to make sure that they understand all these techniques. So it's quite a lot of information to memorize or get familiar with, and I'm writing these projects to sort of help people as they go through this. All these terms should be familiar to you. You're going to be a security professional. So anyway, there's a few more extra credit things. I think that's it. Are there any questions about anything? Only got a couple people here, and I think I answered Edison's questions last night or the day before, so I'm going to stop the recording.